Hey guys, this is Dave. So the Meze Alba was released, I think about a year ago, and I remember seeing all the reviews and all the first impressions kind of slowly starting to pop up. And initially I was really curious and I even looked into getting a review unit, but for, I don't know, whatever reason, it just never came about. Now fast forward a year and a couple of months ago, I received an email from Meze and they were offering to send me a review unit in exchange for my honest opinion. Of course I agreed and they sent me this unit. So thank you, first of all, Meze, for being so gracious and for providing this review unit. So I've had this for a while now, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but you know how intrigued I am by this $150 to $200 price bracket, because it seems like this price bracket is where a lot of the surprises take place, and that's where a lot of the innovation and competition has been happening the last couple of years. So of course, when this arrived, before my initial listen, I was trying to get into my little objective headspace, whatever that means, which I'll be honest, it was kind of hard because there's just so many reviews and so much information about these that's already out there. And that information's been coming, for a whole year now. And a lot of this information was coming from some of my fellow hobbyists that I respect and I really trust their opinions. So I'm sure subconsciously, even though I was trying to be objective, who knows if that was really even possible at that point. Point being, there was something in the back of my head that was telling me this was quite possibly going to be one of those surprises. So I guess the first question is, did it surprise me? But the bigger question is, of course, with all the newer releases that have come out in the last year or so, is the Alba still relevant and can the Alba still compete? Well, those are the questions I want to try and answer in today's video. So as usual, of course, we'll talk about what's in the box. We'll go over the specs and then we'll get into sound. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. So this is everything that you get in the box. You've got the IMs, a small protective case, and then a small assortment of ear tips. But they've also included this little 3.5 to Type-C USB adapter, which is really nice. So you can plug it right into your phone or any other source that has a Type-C output. So as far as its driver configuration, this uses a single dynamic driver. And if you remember, Meze also released the $700 Advar, which is also a single dynamic driver IM, and it takes a similar design approach as this, but I have to say it's really nice to see them offering the Alba at a much more affordable price. And $159, that's not super cheap, but it is certainly within reach of a lot more hobbyists. But you have a pretty solid package here. And I think they did a great job with the design as well. I love this pearlescent kind of finish. And if you look closely, you'll notice a little bit of a sparkle to it. But for this being under $200, to me, this looks and even feels like something you would expect to cost a little more. Although I do wish the cable was a little easier to manage. It is a 2-pin cable with a 3.5 millimeter termination, and they do have a 4.4 millimeter version available for an additional $59. And the cable looks really nice. It matches the aesthetic of the IEMs nicely. It's also very soft. It's very light. However, it is a little thin, and I have found myself occasionally having to tussle with it because of tangling. Again,
That's a little bit of a nitpick because it does get a lot right. But if I'm comparing this cable to something like the cable that came with a CK2V, and I know that is a much newer IM, but that cable is just so good for this price point. And again, I do think this is a good cable for this price point, but it is a little thin and I have had just a few issues with tangling. Now, as far as the fit and comfort of the Alba, these are what I would consider to be on the smaller side, but they fit my ears very nicely. I was also able to achieve a proper sill with the included tips, although I did end up swapping over to the Dividus Velvet tips because they just seem to work a little better for me. But generally speaking, I haven't had any issues with discomfort or fit. I also like the case. It is pretty small, which is great for traveling, but it's not so small as to cause any issues when it comes to storing the IMs. Everything seems to fit a little snug, but it's still easy enough just to wrap them up and throw them in the case. Anyway, I think that covers all of the specifications and the physical attributes of the Alba. So let's go ahead and move on to sound. So as far as the overall sound presentation of the Alba, this does kind of fall into that V-shaped category. I would call it probably a more mild V-shape. So you do have a little more energy in the bass and treble. That said, this is probably one of the best V-shaped IMs that I've heard under $200 as far as its ability to maintain excellent overall tonal balance and its ability to reproduce vocals and instruments naturally. And I guess when I think of a proper V-shape, the Meze Alba, it just comes closer to what I consider to be a proper V-shape than any other IM that I've tried within this price range, even much newer IMs. But let's go ahead and just break things down a little more, and we'll go ahead and, as usual, we'll start with the bass. So in terms of bass quantity, despite this having, again, that V-shaped tuning, they did seem to take a little more of a reserved or restrained or more tasteful approach in terms of its overall bass quantity or energy when contrasted against the top half of the tuning. And what I mean by that is that the bass energy just seems to land somewhere kind of right in the middle, almost exactly between what I would call neutral and bass head. So there's definitely a little bit of a bass boost, but it doesn't dominate or overpower any other part of its tuning. So you've got enough bass presence to ensure proper amounts of dynamics and punchiness, but it's not necessarily in your face. So it's fun, but it's not obnoxious or it's not overdone. Now, if I did have one nitpick, it would actually be that I do wish it had a little more bass presence, because I do still feel like my attention is being drawn to the top half of the tuning. But generally speaking, I still think this is pretty balanced for this price point. In any case, I feel like they did a good job with the overall bass quantity relative to the rest of the tuning. But it's not just the quantity that I feel like they got right. This also delivers the quality as well. So it delivers really good bass texture, good tactility, it's tight, and it maintains surprisingly good clarity in the transition out of the mid bass into the lower mids. So you have good dynamics, you've got texture, and just an overall impressively controlled bass response for this price point. In other words, I guess really you get the benefits of having a little bit of that richness, a little bit of warmth. You've got that good mid-bass punch, but without sacrificing any detail or texture. And then as you move into the mid-range or the lower mids, we know we do have some mid-bass energy, and that does carry into the lower mids. And what that does also, in addition to that, you got a little extra mid-bass punch, but it also adds a little weight to male vocals and any of the instruments that are going to land in those lower mids. But what's impressive about the way they handled the tuning of the lower mids is that you aren't going to get that bass bleed or any congestion that you frequently can encounter with a V-shaped tuning. So you get the benefits of having a little more of a full-bodied presentation in the lower mids, but without the problems that can sometimes be introduced with that extra energy. So you've got good clarity in the low mids, and that carries into the upper mids as well, because you then have a pretty steep but controlled rise into the pinna or ear gain region, and there is enough energy in the upper mids to ensure good vocal and instrument clarity, but it's controlled, so it doesn't really ever reach the point of becoming shouty or overbearing. And because of the way they approach the tuning or that curve through the pinna gain area, and because of how controlled it is, they've done a really good job of ensuring good vocal and instrument naturalness. And that's no different with the treble tuning. It's natural, it's generally controlled, so I'm not picking up on any sibilance or graininess. That said, there is certainly a little more energy in the lower treble, which gives it just a little more of an engaging presentation. And I don't know if I would call this aggressive, at least based on my preferences, but I can see how maybe someone might perceive it that way. For me, it doesn't quite go that far, although it is maybe edging a little close to that aggressive sound. And I think they did a really good job with the upper treble as far as its energy as well. It's got good air, it has good micro nuances, but I don't feel like they overdid it either. Now, in terms of its technical performance, again, it's hard to find fault with this at this price point. This is competing with my top IEMs under $200 in terms of its technical performance. So the soundstage, while maybe not being super wide, it's certainly, I feel, above average. Imaging is also very good. Detail retrieval is very good. And again, because of the way they approached the upper treble, they seem to find a good balance between keeping things natural, but also delivering good levels of detail and micro details as well. And I think that's how the Alba's whole presentation kind of struck me. So if I step back and I'm taking maybe more of a bird's eye view, you're getting a little bit of everything. It's tonally balanced, it's natural sounding, but because they went for maybe a mild V, it's also engaging and fun, but it's still very tasteful in its overall presentation. It's not in your face fun. It strikes a great balance between engaging the listener while at the same time bringing a sense of refinement and control, which brings us to comparison. So from a technical viewpoint or perspective, this is up there with my top IEMs, which are the Performer 5, the 5+2, the Dragonfly 81T, the 61T, the CK2V. Now the imaging and separation of the CK2V might be a little better, but I still think, generally speaking, the Alba can compete on a technical level with any of my favorites under $200. But what about its tuning? Because again, you all know I prioritize tuning over technical performance. Now, it should be stated, there are a lot of $200 IEMs on the market that I have not heard. So this is strictly based on what I have heard. So again, if you don't hear me mention one of your favorites, it's just probably because I have not heard it. That said, my top 5 are the Butterfly 61T, and I have them out on the table here, the 5+2, the Chopin, the Performer 5, the CK2V, but where does that leave the Alba in terms of not just its tuning, but its overall performance? And again, remember, we're talking a year later, so there's a lot of new IEMs that have come on the scene since its release. Well, as far as where I feel this lands in terms of overall performance, to me, this is pretty much neck and neck with my top IEMs, the 61T, the 5+2. I consider this to easily be one of the best IEMs that I've ever had the pleasure of listening to under $200, even a year later. And here's the thing, I still love, of course, every one of my top 5 IEMs because each one brings something a little bit different to the table. It has its own unique appeal to me. And that's how I see the Alba. It just brings something a little different. It has just a little bit of a different tuning flavor. And I think part of that appeal to me is its level of
refinement, control, its naturalness, and just the overall tonal balance. But at the same time, it's not boring. It actually brings a little bit of fun and excitement to the picture. So I guess the bottom line is that, again, even a year later, not only is the Alba still relevant, it's still one of the best IEMs under $200 I've ever had the pleasure of listening to, period. But yeah, I think that says basically everything you need to know about how I feel about the Alba. So that concludes my review of the Meze Alba. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch. If you like my content, please take a second and hit that subscribe button. Also, if you would please like this video, please share this video, please comment on this video. I hope you have an awesome day.